The United States of America is a country that ranks 37th in healthcare and number 1 in the number of prisoners per 100,000 people. Meaning, if you're sick in the United States and need a bed, your best bet in some cases is going to jail. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Where did all this begin? The United States started with the arrival of Native Americans around 15,000 BC. They split into a bunch of cultures. Then, thousands of years later, in 1492, Christopher Columbus arrived, who was a really horrible person, and he brought a bunch of people with him, many of whom were also really horrible, but some were less horrible. The process of Europeans being horrible to indigenous cultures was called colonization. Sometimes these Europeans formed treaties with different groups, but they would go on to break every treaty as soon as it was convenient. The British colonialists came up with an idea that they knew was bad, but they did it anyway, which was racial slavery. Slavery spread through Britain's colonies, including the original 13 colonies which later formed the United States. You could say that America was formed out of the worst of British people, which is why villains in American movies are British, even though this makes no sense. In 1776, the colonists declared their independence from Britain, making them essentially domestic terrorists. But fortunately, the terrorists won and they created the United States. In 1789, white American men wrote a constitution, and in 1791, they added a Bill of Rights. Women and racial minorities were not considered very important by either document, and slavery would go on for about another 74-ish years, give or take a couple centuries, depending on who you ask. After slavery ended-ish, many freed slaves and their supporters were brutalized by more domestic terrorists such as the Ku Klux Klan. As before in American history, these terrorists also mostly won and successfully overthrew governments in states such as Georgia. The United States went through massive culture shifts in the early 1900s, banning alcohol, deciding alcohol was okay again, giving women the right to vote, declaring a war with Germany, and losing all of its money in 1929. Through all of it, white supremacists mostly still ran things. And in the 1940s, a failed artist in Germany named Adolf Hitler decided to borrow the United States' most horrible ideas regarding white supremacy, and that turned out pretty awful. In the 1960s, there was another major culture shift towards civil rights for African Americans. Across the country, it was declared unlawful to segregate spaces based on race. Therefore, white supremacists who ran things did the only thing they could think of, which was to remove social services. If black people were going to use the public pool, they demolished the public pool. If black people were going to use public healthcare, they defunded healthcare. If black people were going to get elected to office, they would make sure that government didn't function. Many Americans today don't know how much of the country was formed by white terrorism and racism because Americans don't read things. Modern Americans are fond of guns, diabetes, and ideas that sound like freedom. But despite all its flaws, the United States of America still has some of the best pizza chains in the world, is the best at designing smartphones, and produces the best films that have fast and/or furious in the title. That's the United States.